Welcome to another session of Tech Talks with NASSCOM Insights. My name is Bandev Ghosh and I represent NASSCOM Insights. Some time back, we had released an interesting report on AI as a service, which had created a lot of buzz. And we want to, through this particular platform, want to take this forward. So today we have an industry leading panel, and we also have Niju, who had helped us to put together this report. So apart from Niju, I would like to introduce Dr. Swati Jain, Vice President Analytics at EXL, Dr. Ullas Nambiar, Managing Director, Artificial Intelligence at Accenture, and of course our own Niju, our partner, Avanteum Partners, who, as I already mentioned, had helped us put together this report. So welcome to all of you. So if we could start. Yeah, we can start with a slightly cliche statement or a theme or a topic, and this is being repeated oftentimes in these days, at least from NASSCOM's perspective. But be that as may be, I mean, we can obviously start building on that once we introduce this. So India's quest for growth powered by artificial intelligence is quite ambitious. It is estimated that artificial intelligence has the potential to add up to $500 billion to the Indian economy over the next 5 years. So the question is not if AI has the potential to digitally transform the Indian economy, but of how to achieve the goals envisaged. AI has the power to disrupt the status quo, bring in large-scale changes, and alter the business landscape. Tailwinds such as availability of low-cost, on-demand computing power, an ever-expanding dataverse, and off-the-shelf ML models/algorithms are contributing to the overall growth story. But the real challenges lie in driving large-scale adoption of AI to solve critical business and societal problems. There is no doubt that the success of the much-vaunted AI for all, quote unquote, in the Indian context runs through AI as a service, a technology term for democratized AI. In fact, the title of our report is AI as a Service, Democratizing AI for Scale. In fact, democratizing of AI and data aligns well with India's planned leap across the core sectors of agriculture, public health, MSMEs, and infrastructure. So to start this discussion, first, let me just briefly point out the broad 4 or 5 pointers that we have chosen to be the subject of conversation for our current session. So one is how to democratize the use of AI. So our hypothesis, and that also got reflected in our report, is can AI as a service bring the the necessary changes that can help organizations across industry segments and across business functions to drive greater adoption of AI? And what are the emerging opportunity areas for service providers? We have Ullas from Accenture, who's one of the largest service providers, and AI is an important portfolio, not only in India, but also globally. And we also have, EXL, I'm Swati from EXL, where data analytics, big data analytics, and AI also forms an important part of their portfolio. The second pointer is what are the expectations from the emerging business models? Now, we know that we are in a flux and there are a lot of new business models which are emerging. And a lot of that depends on the degree of adoption across different industry segments. So there's the service aspect, there's this product aspect. We know that India is developing a homegrown ecosystem of cloud-enabled or software as a service product, some of which also overlaps with AI. So what are the emerging business models in terms of service, product, pricing models which are emerging, collaboration amongst the different stakeholders who make up for the ecosystem? In fact, that is one of the important aspects which we developed in our report. I mean, what are the who are the players in this key market, and whether the developments in India is in line with the global developments in terms of the evolution of the market scale. And if there is scope for consolidation or mergers and acquisitions going forward, like it happens across different technology areas or domains. The third is the kind of challenges as practice leaders or leaders in the particular area AI that you face with clients when it comes to messaging. Proof of there's a new concept. Obviously, there's a new debate which is ensuing, which is like, is proof of concept good enough, or customers are actually looking for proof of value from the service providers at the beginning, so that they're able to better comprehend what kind of return on investment can AI or investments in AI can bring to their processes. And then we have the eternal problem of data availability, the cleanliness of data and things like that, and scalability options. And finally, would like to cover briefly aspects of privacy and explainability, the algos and the black boxes, ethics in AI, um, and responsible AI. I mean, so these are like, terms which are interchangeably used. So that could be our last point of discussion. So with this, I would like to start with Ullas. So um, from your 30,000 feet view, how do you see the AI market evolving in India? And here I'm consciously using the word AI because I know that AI in itself is probably not geared for adoption or integration, and it has to take some form of servitization or a new business models which can make it easier for organizations to improvise and adopt some of these technologies in their processes. So how do you see the AI or slash AI as a service market evolving in India, and what are the service models that you see? If I could start with you, Ullas. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, Bandev, for having me on this one. A very interesting concept, right? So I think we are going beyond that report that we had. I think it's timely that we have this discussion. Now, coming to your specific query on AI, I'll address it two ways, right? So there is a larger AI as a market or AI as a technology offering, right? And then there is this consumption model around this, right? So while on one hand you have this new technology which is coming in, which everybody is really, I would say, gung ho about. Even the local kirana shop guy will want to use AI to sell services. So there is that aspect of AI which has caught the imagination of everybody, right? So it's not just the technologists who are talking about AI. You also have the decision makers and the policy makers doing it. NASSCOM is doing a great job. We have the NITI Aayog coming with AI for India report. So yes, people are taking note of the impact of this technology and the benefits it will bring to not only business but the society in large, right? So, and when I speak about society in large, other governments, other regions are also talking about how to look at AI. Now, we are not in a space where regulation has come into play compared to, let's say, a crypto, etc., because AI has not gone there. And we will come to address the regulatory aspects of AI when we come into some of the later parts of this segment. I think there is a need for regulation, but so far AI has not come into that spectrum of whether it's a regulatory technology or not. So first is AI as a technology, AI as a game changer, so to speak, right? So if you were to think of progress of humankind progress, then you have the industrial revolution, and before that the agricultural revolution, and then now we are in this digital revolution, and then the AI revolution, right? So digital was, or technology revolution was mostly Y2K led, and then you have this new concept coming, which is everybody largely grown on top of the web, a lot of industries, a lot of service models which are digital native offerings, and then on top of that you are now bringing this meta capability, so to speak, which is bringing intelligence into the services, intelligence into the offerings you are bringing, right? That's where AI is. Now, the allure of AI is all about mimicking human minds, right? That is the whole purpose of AI. It is about creating this sentient being who acts, talks, and behaves, but it is morally much better, more rational than a typical human being. That's the purpose of AI, right? So, and then obviously it is a superhuman, so it never gets tired, doesn't ask for any kind of salary increments at the end of the day, and you can get more done from the same amount, right? So that's the I would say 50,000 feet value proposition of AI. Right? Now, when we take it down and bring it into the context of India, right? We have to be clear that India still is a delivery arm of a lot of these services, right? We are typically, from an IT perspective or a technology perspective, we sit in a place where a lot of these new ideas are getting executed from, I'm saying it in a very nice way, right? It doesn't mean that we are not bringing thought leadership. We do bring thought leadership into it, but we are not at the forefront of thought leadership. And right, we would have 1% of people doing thought leadership sitting in India, but 99% of what we do today, and not just in AI, but everything else, is also about executing it very well, right? And that's where we are very well known for. Our talent pools, our engineers, right? The young minds who are actually working on it, very highly regarded globally, right? And of course, that's why we are in high demand with their ability to actually sit down and spend long hours and actually bring these technologies to reality and to actually deliver services, right? So in that sense, we are still not on the delivery or on the service part of the economy, right? And AI is not going to be any different, right? Because that's where our history or our legacy lies there. So even when we are starting to do AI or any new technology for that matter, crypto, and any of the newer AR, VR, and all of those which are going to come in, we still will have a large part of the building blocks being delivered out of India, right? The business value applications, the business models, etc., might come from out around the globe, but the technical muscle is going to come from here, and that's, I think, our sweet spot, and we should not lose that, right? Can we move up on that value chain? We can. We can also move up and start doing, I would say, especially India-centric ideas, India-centric business models, and we have seen this, right? When you do, localization, take a global idea and put it into a local context, most of the times it doesn't work. And AI is not going to be any different, right? You take an idea from somewhere else and bring it here. There are so many nuances and layers of what an India is that it is not going to work directly. You cannot lift and shift ideas from anywhere. So you will still need that aspect of it, right? But where we still fit largely is in that delivery execution space, right? And we cannot miss that bus. We have to still own that bus. We have to be the best, I would say, the delivery center globally for any AI that has to come, right? So like how people 10 years ago said, anybody wants to do any sort of back office work, go to India. They do it the best, they do it the cheapest, and they do the highest quality. We need to continue to grow on that path, right? And then NASSCOM plays a significant role on that. We have to make sure that our engineers are trained well. They are abreast of the latest in terms of AI, right? They have access to latest tools and technologies that are required, because this is obviously a little different from the traditional ways of doing programming, right? You need access to these high-end machines. You need access to the latest of algorithms. And the biggest one in AI is all data, right? The more data you have, the more data sets you can create, the more experiments you can run, the better your solutions are going to become, right? And the scale and the volume of this data typically is not something that you can give access to every individual student in a campus, right? Yeah. And that's where the challenge comes in. That's where the biggest gap that we see today from somebody who is coming out of a campus into an industry. And the fact that we are not able to scale AI is because there is this huge gap from the theoretical understanding of what AI is to actual practical implementations, right? And the reason I'm saying is that that's where our sweet spot lies, and we should capitalize on that. We should capitalize and continue to build on that. Build world-class data scientists, world-class data engineers, right? And then, of course, you will get your world-class business leaders. And I mean, almost every business leader today is an Indian. So I don't think we need to worry about that part. I think what we should worry about really is the data scientists coming out from us, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about the IITs. The IITs and the IISCs of the world are doing well, right? But the scale that I am seeing here, right, to be very honest, our 8 or 10 IITs are not going to solve that for us, right? We need our tier 2s to step up. We need our tier 3s to step up, right? And there are gamuts of services that somebody can offer, right? You can be a data scientist and you can be a data engineer, right? So data science obviously needs a lot more algorithmic, a lot more math background, and which is, again, I will emphasize multiple times during the call, math is very, very important. And somehow in our curriculum, we have let math go away for whatever reason, and it becomes a little challenging, especially when you go to a tier 2, tier 3. Emphasis on math, emphasis on algorithms is not that high, right? And that's going to be a critical differentiator. So we need to ensure that all our students, all our young developers are strong in math, because AI's foundation is math. All science is math, but especially AI is founded on math, right? And you need to have a strong foundation on that. Otherwise, you are just a glorified programmer copying somebody's library and building something, but you cannot explain why you did what you did. You cannot explain what are the outcomes, and that goes into that explainability part of it, right, which we'll talk about later. So it's all connected in that sense, right? If you get your core, your building blocks well done, then I think we have a great space. But the reason I'm alluding to this is we are not a consumer-led economy yet, right? So AI in India is not driving a lot of demand. What we are is we are a producers of AI. We are essentially sitting and building all of these, and the demand is coming from across the world. The use cases are coming from elsewhere. Do we have the ability to consume AI? Obviously, we have the ability to consume AI. But do we have enough of those use cases today which are India-centric? My answer is no. We don't have enough of those, right? We do have some copycat ideas and which are there, but I think we should still focus on building these AIs versus using these AI. That is where my point of.
Thank you, Ullas, for that detailed answer. So, Swati, I'd like to take this question to you as well. You're leading, advanced analytics at EXL, and I was looking at EXL's website, and I saw a lot of focus on analytics, and you have your own products. I saw quite a few of them, and you have, separated analytics and artificial intelligence in two different sections. So, my question is, even during the interviews that we conducted for this AI as a service report, I recall you having saying that most of your demand, as Ullas also alluded to, is actually coming from overseas customers, and we are not yet a consumption nation for AI. So I'm sure you have a local practice as well, which caters to the demands of Indian customers across the 3 or 4 areas where EXL is working. So one is healthcare, one is BFSI. I saw a lot of focus from EXL's point of view. So as far as use cases are concerned, do you think, is there a difference between the kind of use cases which are typical for a US customer or a European customer and the customer who sits in India, an Indian business, a banking institution, financial service? I guess the use cases would be probably similar, but what is it stopping the adoption of AI as far as the local industry is concerned, the local demand side is concerned? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Bandev, one is thanks Ullas for that laying out this entire landscape, and I would say that see whether we compare the global scenario or the Indian scenario, some of the basics requirements remain similar. Like, for example, today, data engineering is so much in demand, be it abroad or in India, right? So that remains. So I think the challenges also remain similar. And if I were to put like the types of services, like if I were to bucketize it, so if we take AI as a service, it can be across domains, like there are domain specific services. So, for example, the products that you have seen, you might have seen EXL's specific products for improved collections. So that is one payment or which was also published in the AIaaS report. So these are domain specific products, and that can be used by a customer abroad or in India. So these domain, or they may be insurance, underwriting solutions, etc. So they can be used with some bit of customization, which is always required. Then there are certain services across the value chain in AIaaS that we see, that maybe like data annotation services. So that again, I think is required as much here as for any use case. It depends on these are use case specific. So for example, we use Google Maps or Google Vision in some of our Google Vision specifically for some of our logistics clients for labeling the images and all. So that is another kind of. Then there's third is across different functions, say customer service, fraud detection, etc. So that is function specific use cases. Again, we have like we have certain products which provide sentiment analysis and for customer service and like for chatbots in terms of that. So these are, I would say, some of the products in the AIaaS products or services in the AIaaS landscape, and the challenges remain similar. Like one is some of the challenges that are there, and I feel that AIaaS is sort of helping overcome those challenges, which may be in terms of availability of data. So if there are pre-trained models, at least that challenge is overcome. Availability of a skill set. So AIS helps with one-click outcomes. Then it helps in that case, even if the professionals are not that much skilled, it helps out in those. Then again, I think even a value proposition of what exactly it will do is a little more clear with AI as a service. So these are some of the challenges, but then these are nothing India specific. I think it's across the globe, and that is something which I have not observed in terms of India, that it is something very different. Though, of course, India sometimes tends to some of the use cases we see first starting in the global arena, and then we also see Indian customers adopting that. But then the Indian startups are very much forward in this area. Yeah.
Thanks, Swati. I'd like to involve Niju. So Niju, I mean, if you recall, while doing the report, we interviewed, practitioners from the Indian startup system, ecosystem, AI specific, and some of them were actually talking about, the plug and play, as what they alluded to, models or algorithms which are already available over the cloud, like AI developer services / ML as a service, which can be readily absorbed and and pushed into production environments, even if the teams do not have the requisite skill, or maybe subpar skills, maybe something of that sort. So, the flexibility in pricing and this plug and play, are they not good enough to drive the kind of adoption that we see in India? Or can we, I mean, is it safe to say that, going forward, these factors can actually push the servitization or the services to increase the services component? Or, I mean, I'm sure, but going forward, do you think, I mean, some of these aspects can actually prove to be game changers? Pricing options or plug and play, or for example, the cloud computing part of it. Yeah, basically. What is your take on this? Yeah, Niju.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, thanks for having me here along with two of the stalwarts. So one of the advantages is that you don't speak the industry lingo. The disadvantage is that you're sitting in front of two really big experts, and so you right now would be trying to kind of defensive, not to expose your lack of knowledge on this. But what we very proudly do is that we wear the consultant's hat. So before I answer the question of the subvertization, I would probably take a slightly if Ullas has taken a 30,000 feet overview, I will go 2,000 feet above that. So first of all, what I would like to look at is more on India and where does it stand in context to the global one. Now, some numbers, because we love numbers, we work with numbers. So globally, we are talking about something like, almost 58 to 60 billion of AI market. And out of that, about 1/7 of that is the AI as a service. Now, the interesting part is that if you cut this to 2025, this is going to grow by a big number. We are talking about almost like 240, 250 billion number. And the contribution of AI as a service is increasing to about 1/5 of that. So that itself is an indicator as to which direction we are moving in. And that, according to me, is a very interesting one. And how it is going to be interesting for India is, so we were just looking at, I mean, as part of the study and otherwise also, if you look at the Western world, its challenges are to a great extent different from what India's challenges are. There they talk about, because they have already at a certain level of maturity in terms of industrialization, social sector, finance, everything. While when we talk about India, India is still trying to kind of, move up from very fundamental level into a growth stage. Now, the key difference, according to me, is that there it is incremental in many cases. In India's case, it's transformative. And that's where the huge amount of opportunity exists. For example, I mean, I always, I think it's a very old concept, but I love talking about it, is how we bypass the fixed landline, evolutionary cycle altogether when the mobile came. Because I remember way back in 2001, when I started my career, one of the first engagements I did was looking at the network analyzers, which are used by the the telecom service providers. And at that time, I was actually shocked to look at what's the tele density of India. And in 5 years from there or 8 years from there, I guess that completely changed. So that's the power of technology. And somewhere it also works in India's favor that India is still at a very nascent stage of development. So it doesn't have to really cut through many of those, routes that others would have taken and probably learn from them. So you can sit at a distance and then look at it, what has happened, and take advantage of that. So why AI as a service? I mean, there are many, positives that are going in favor of that. And some of them which Bandev mentioned. One, of course, we are talking about, cost being one of the critical elements when it comes to AI. Now, AI is all said and done, while, probably 2018 is the first time when I heard a minister talking about a cutting edge technology in the parliament, talking about 480 million of budgetary allocations being made for AI, ML, and IoT. And I was super and pleasantly surprised, because that you leave it to typically the bureaucrats to handle that. But here the minister is saying that, oh, this is what we are going to focus on. So that's where I think we made the change in terms of adopting and bringing into the mainstream of the national discourse. And that is where AI's power is. So when we talk about a 400 million investment, so it also kind of, gives us a feel that we are talking about many of the positives that working in favor. So one is that, of course, there is a large, SME sector that India has. Now it needs technology badly to kind of, ramp up and be among the people who can be counted. And that's where I think the AI has the power to enable it. Now, how can it get enabled? Of course, if you leave it to the big, companies, sorry for pointing out to both of you, but I would say that ultimately democratization can only happen when we make it more affordable. And one of the other enabling factors has been the cloud, no doubt about it. So this one, then there are other factors like, it can be modular. So I can look at, what is my specific challenge and address it, or create a solution which can address a specific challenge at my client's end. I really don't have to really boil the ocean to get there. The other thing that we look at is in terms of flexibility and scalability. For a smaller organization or a mid-sized organization, that's an extremely critical element today, especially in a world which, shows a different color almost every other day. So you have to be flexible, you have to be scalable, and that's where the power of AI as a service comes in. So then the bottom line is that everything seems to be falling in place. Just that, if I pick up the challenges which Swati mentioned or Ullas mentioned, if you were to address that, I think we are pretty much there in terms of taking advantage of this humongously big opportunity that presents itself in terms of creating the solutions as well as adoption. Because if we are to talking about a 500 billion as a component to be built into the economy, I think it has to be a demand-led thing. And that demand can only come in if we make it more democratic, and AI as a service is the way forward for that. Yes, Bandev.
Excellent points, Niju. And I think the crux and thrust of our findings are actually, around these very pointers that you've just very clearly mentioned. Ullas, I would like to, start with you for the next, the broader pointer. So, from a customer perspective, what kind of expectations do you see, they have? So, of course, so many there are so many aspects which are not yet clearly defined. For example, the access to data, for example, and there could be aspects in terms of how is the algorithm built, and if there is some kind of visibility. So when you meet a customer and when you propose, go out in the market, for example, GTM. So what kind of expectations do you see from the customer side? Are they kind of circumspect? Do we have to really start from the very first stage as to introduce AI as a concept and then try to tell them the kind of value it can unlock for their processes, or do you think some of them actually come prepared with some kind of the basic idea and identify at least the areas where they think AI can add value to their business? So what is your observation on this?
Yeah, so I think the customers and let's say the decision makers are all quite well informed, right? I think maybe I would say 3 years or 5 years back when AI was still evolving and And we had this notion of mobile social analytics and cloud. Right? SMAC was the term at that point, is what was used. People used to still think about a lot more about data channels and connectivity channels, etc. Today, and there was an evolution of people talking about big data. I have lots of data with me. What can I do with the data? Today, the conversation is not that, right? So today, people have gone beyond that. In fact, I think big data doesn't really register in a lot of the conversations today, right? Conversations do start with AI. And largely driven by two needs, right? And I'll allude to something that Niju mentioned earlier, right? I think we really have the benefit of having no legacy, no baggage, right? Especially in India. So if I speak to a BFSI client in India, the ask is, while similar in nature, like let's say want to build, let's say, automatic loan approval system or something like that, but the challenge or the beauty of the ask is everything is on WhatsApp, right? Which I would not get from a global client. No global bank is coming and saying, I want to do it over WhatsApp or a social media, right? I typically tend to get those kinds of things from Indian markets. The other big, obvious, and a beautiful aspect of AI is on the language part of it, right? And especially the Indian markets, you get a lot of that, right? It's not just English. You have at least 20 different languages that people want to deal with. Especially in the BFSI segment, I see a lot of ask for Hindi, a lot of ask for Gujarati, especially the trading community, they speak a lot of Gujarati. So those become predominant, whereas those are not the case when you go to a global client, right? They're happy with English, especially, right? So while the use cases are largely similar, right? There are differences in the expectation to begin with, right? The second thing is the maturity of the operation, client's operation is much higher in a global organization, right? So a global bank obviously has much bigger volumes they're talking about, right? Maybe the client numbers are smaller, but the per unit or per customer cost is much higher, right? So they are talking about millions of dollars being approved, whereas we are talking about tens of dollars being approved in India. But then we make up for it by saying, I have 100 million customers, right? So the scale is in the end user, right? The number of users who are going to interact with your system, right, are much higher. But the value of each interaction is so small that you have to be very cost effective. Even a global client, my typical value proposition is $1,000 to $2,000. So if my service costs $5, it is something they can bear. The cost is not high for them. Whereas when I come to India, price is king still, right? So I have to be at the lowest possible cost, but I have to have the highest possible service delivery value, right? When high availability, high throughput. So it challenges you in many ways, right? Because of the uniqueness of where we sit, right? And that largely is due to I would say the maturity of what our services are, right? While we have the similar services, I think the maturity of those services, the number of years they have been in service, the business they run, they are much smaller, right? And so they bring their unique challenges. And so it's an interesting space to be. I would say as a technologist, both are equally interesting, right? In the other one, in the global parlance, typically they are looking at other aspects like your data cannot go out of the European Union, right? So you need to address those issues, right? But you have easier ways of solving that because a lot of the providers are also based out of Europe. So you can host some services in Europe. Whereas when they come to India and you say, I cannot have data go out of India, then you find it very hard to find an AWS instance in India because it is hosted in Singapore, right? So you get into different sort of challenges. And that's largely because we are not still consuming it, right? We are still delivering it. But if the more we start consuming, I think AWS now has in Chennai, and Google is trying to come, and Azure is trying to come. But the point being that you get into different sort of challenges when you get into an Indian client, right? But largely, I would say the technology challenges remain the same, right? It is the execution where the differences come into play. Your overall solution, as I said, I want to still approve a loan. Doesn't matter whether I'm in US or in India, right? But the process, the scale, the per unit cost, they vary significantly.
I think cost is one of the.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think cost is still the biggest driver. I mean, when it comes to adoption, I mean, even if the costs plummet when it comes to infrastructure or cloud or as a service models, still this point that you mentioned per customer revenue, or so to say, is still so. I mean, we can look to make it up with the large volumes that we have in India, but still, I mean, the trade-off isn't actually sitting quite right. So yeah, so nice observation. So Swati, I would like to ask you about this important aspect. Now, when we talk about the ecosystem, we know there are a lot of players. It's a crowded market. So this is also one of the findings of the report. I mean, which I'm sure you have gone through. And we have large service providers like EXL, Accenture, IBM, and on the system integrator side, for example, Capgemini or Atos, and all of them. And then we have a growing AI SaaS startup ecosystem, which is at some level, they're also competing with, value-added services. Particularly, I saw during the course of our interviews in areas like computer vision, particularly in industrial/automotive, and they're talking about predictive asset maintenance and, predicting mechanical failures and things like that, and also defect/anomaly detection. So how do you think, from a service provider perspective, how do you think you're going ahead? I mean, when it comes to your GTM, so are you looking at a situation where you are actually collaborating with different other participants in this market, or it's still an individual kind of a setup where you go and you drive and you devise your go-to market and you choose your markets and position your product, or are you also trying to or looking to collaborate with the other participants in the market? How do you think it is planning going forward?
So I would say that it has been both, going individually depending on the maturity of our solutions, AIaaS, as well as collaboration. Of late, collaboration has been there in some of the newer products. And so it totally depends whether the product is around, say, if it is around model development, any of the models that has been developed and automated, or it is model monitoring, which we can do in-house, then it remains in-house. But then there are certain products of ours where we've gone to the market in collaboration with others, and one of that is conversational AI chatbot Excelia, where we've collaborated with another company to take that service to the market. So what we are doing is we are integrating and implementing it across different functions of the organization, and we are getting that service from another service provider. Yes. So that is one. Then there are others in which we use the services. So we have primarily built AIaaS by using some of the services from other players, be it, as I talked about, any of the cognitive services provided by the major cloud providers, or any of other solutions provided by any niche players and all. It may be just as I talked about the data annotation services, or just putting something in a tabular format, which is more service that we got and which really increased efficiency big time for us. So there are different ways, but I would say that both collaboration as well as going standalone is something that we are doing. And I would also want to add that in terms of the India players, like Ullas said, in terms of cost that they look at, so the discounting is one of the things. But what I've also noticed in the India players, while the players are not that mature, but there's a lot of agility. So cost drives them, and they are agile. Even for the sake, I have seen in one of my recent clients that to minimize their costs, they are shifting to a different platform, and they are doing it with immense agility. So there's a lot of agility. So there are some unique characteristics which make India market a little different and a little energetic also, as I see my Indian clients.
So Swati, it is like both challenging as well as interesting, because you brought out this aspect of agility. So obviously, I mean, not many organizations can do that, but at the same time, they have to really struggle with some of the other aspects that we spoke about, for example, cost. So yeah, so it's a trade-off between two opposing. So Niju, I would like to come to you on this. we had a lot of interviews, conducted a lot of interviews during our research. So I would like to take your point of view when it comes to the evolution of the market. Do you see some kind of consolidation? Because there are many small players which are currently operating, and I'm sure in the going forward we'll have many more, specific, I mean, smaller niche companies, if you say startups, if you say, which are going to come up. All of them will probably not survive, because we have very large players and for the cloud infrastructure and platform services, as Swati mentioned, we have the 3 or 4 large hyperscalers, for example. But if you also include IBM Cloud Watson, so do you think at this level, I mean, there's bound to be consolidation going forward, where some of these service providers or even global infrastructure players could snap up some of these smaller specialized companies in India?
Okay, that's a very interesting development taking place. So I would say that, I mean, the first point that I would like to make is we are far from having a consolidation happening anytime soon. And the reason for that is that we are still in a very nascent stage. I mean, you need to have a certain level of, market maturity for players to understand that, this is the space that they can play in, and this is what my positioning is. And if I have the wherewithal to address that, then I will do it. Otherwise, I would probably try to kind of, collaborate, acquire, and, partner with someone to address that. We are far from that. So the reason is that, as all of us have been, harping on one point, that the market is quite fragmented, and that's going to remain like this for some more time, because we are still trying to find out where the markets are going to have a critical mass. And if I were to just point towards that, maybe 2 or 3 sectors seems to be the one which would probably be, attaining that level of maturity in the next 3 to 4 years. One of them is definitely going to be manufacturing. You will have BFSI and possibly the healthcare sector. So these are the 3 which I would term as the star categories. Now, if you just take the manufacturing as a segment, I mean, you would have been reading about a lot of these production and linked incentives that the government is offering. So we are very focused on trying to drive manufacturing across different industry sectors, to make sure that, I mean, we are de-risking from whatever is happening at the global level. And while that happens, again, go back to my point, which I was talking about, that we don't have any of the legacy issues that we have to carry. So hence, when we get into the new age manufacturing, we can get into something which can be more edge-based computing. We can build in more.
Yep.
Now, take that as an example and see what's the multitude of, the products that can be created and the platforms that are required. Now, who is doing that? So you can have, for example, Panasonic has set up a, AI, center of excellence. Similarly, Hitachi has. So many global companies have done that. So which are the tech centers? Now, these are global tech centers as well as India specific ones. The one which I refer to about Panasonic is a very India dedicated, AI, center. Now, when they do that, they are looking at going solo to begin with. But then we know for a fact that, I mean, it takes a humongous amount of effort, investment to actually go solo. So you might want to, take someone along. So who would you take along? Those who have got some niche solutions. So hence collaboration, as Swati was clearly mentioning, collaboration is one of the way forward. But at the same time, I mean, we are not saying M&A is not going to happen. It's a tech industry, right? I mean, everyone who, I mean, a young wannabe guy who comes in, he is looking at creating a certain value for his company and selling it off and moving on to something else. So that's going to be, and I have got a first-hand experience of sitting for a fundraise when we had 3 of the AI-based companies and young guys of, I mean, I remember a guy was just about 26 years old. And I think, the guy's clarity was better than all our intelligence put together, and without really, having any other thoughts on that. But what I'm saying is that that's the way this industry is moving. So we'll have a whole lot of, so if you take the classical pyramidal structure where we have the larger organization at the top who have got the resources to invest, and then we have the mid-level guys who are either the people who have the Indian homegrown companies or even the global companies which would invest in AI. And the third one is a whole lot of these smaller companies which would either move on to the next stage or would sell out over a period of time after having created something really valuable. And that's where we see that the M&A will come. But I would say that that's going to take at least 3-4 years or even 5 years before we start seeing that kind of a consolidation. So we are far from that, because there is enough for everyone to munch in, that the pie is big and the pie is increasingly becoming big.
Right, Niju. Thanks for that.
So I will add a little bit there, right? So from what I see in the market today, a lot of the consolidation is happening between the folks who are in a Series A, Series B, Series C. So it's basically inter-startup consolidation. And there are two reasons for it, right? So it's also maybe they have a common VCs who have invested into it and they realize there is synergy in bringing these two teams together. And most of the time, more than the offering they have, it is about that brain power that they have that comes together. And when we look at and Accenture has a separate arm called Accenture Ventures, where we work closely with startups across 150 countries in the world, right? So Accenture Ventures is spread across 150 countries, where we partner with them and we bring them onto actual opportunities with our clients. So it's not just about talking to them and understanding, but also bring them into joint solutioning. And of course, at some point, in some cases, if there is real value and merit, then we sort of invest in some of them. And of course, we also keep tabs on some of these to figure out eventually, is there an acquisition target there, right? But Accenture Ventures is a big arm of Accenture for our strategy organization, and we work very closely with almost every startup that you can speak about, right? So, and we see the evolution, right? In the last 3 or 4 years, I've been part of and discussed with many of them, and we run annual competitions for them to come and present what they're doing. I think they have evolved from their early ideas to actual business applications coming out of what they're building, and then impact delivery. So that's what we started to see from any startup perspective, right? You have to have a great idea, a great business model around it, and then ultimately, can you actually deliver that value in the real world? The technology is immaterial. You can take any startup, I can fill it, agri-tech, you can do crypto, you can replace AI with any other technology, but this is the basic building block of a startup. Great idea, great team, great execution, value delivery. If you have all of those put together, you will have a successful startup. And it's no different for AI. Now, the only caveat here is that I have not seen enough of them trying to address India-centric problems, right? They, again, deviate towards industry-specific problems. So they'll say, I'm solving a BFSI problem. And then BFSI could be common in US, Europe, in India, and somewhere else, right? So it gives them a larger footprint to deal with. But there are very few who do this thing. And I think when they do it, it actually falls into slightly different spectrum, like agri-tech. Then it becomes a combination of AI and vision and robotics coming for solving a more fundamental problem in better management of fields and farm and stuff like that. So it becomes a slightly different way of solving the problem, or for that matter, healthcare, right? So you do have AI built into a lot of these, but now you're solving an industry-specific problem. And if the industry is India-centric, then obviously you're solving an India problem. But if you say largely still people try to address a global market because it's easier to sell the business case when you have a larger footprint and a total addressable market, right? Having said that, I think the maturity is improving. I can see more and more maturity coming into the ecosystem.
Just one point which I would like to add, again, picking up from the research that we did. We put this question to many of these smaller organizations, whether they see the evolution as a threat to their existence. And, they would agree with me that we were pleasantly surprised that none of them showed any kind of, an apprehension on this count. On the contrary, Ullas, just to pick up the last point that you mentioned, the India-specific solutions, most of these smaller organizations would start with someone that they know of who would allow them to actually try out a particular, idea, solution it for them. And once they do that, even if it hasn't taken them to a ROI level, they would like to showcase it as much to the outside world. And the first thing that they do is that take this solution outside of the country, because naturally there is a better realization on what they do, right? So, and they were very clear that, they would get an opportunity to work with the larger players, and that they are pretty much open to working as a, I would say a surrogate organization. But if that brings in the kind of, valuation, what's the harm in doing that?
Thanks, Niju, Swati, and Ullas for those interesting comments. With that, I mean, we can go on to the next one. And Swati, this time I would like to start with you. So analytics, data, Ullas has already mentioned. I mean, that is the backbone for AI and machine learning. So when it comes to, and he has also mentioned, for example, the availability of instances, and data localization, or, laws which are being passed to safeguard data. And we know, there are certain industries where we have this concept of PII, personal identifiable information, and banking, financial services, and healthcare, and retail, of course, to a large extent. These are the sectors which are most vulnerable, from a data privacy point of view. And there are millions of customers whose personal data is out there in the market. And from a service provider perspective, what kind of best practices, or what is the kind of evolution that you see when it comes to data privacy? And also that kind of partially, addresses the question of data availability, because, you require data to build models and to train the models further and to make them more precise. You have to keep on training them. So there needs to be, a continuous flow of data. New data, for example, which can, give you better predictions, for example, for example, in retail. So this data privacy and the accessibility of data, do you see any convergence in these two aspects? And from your perspective, how do you see these the companies or the providers are actually addressing these concerns?
Right. So, Bandev, in terms of like the best practices that are being followed here, I would put the data privacy and responsible AI and all of ethics and all, putting them all together. I think a few things that are being seen. Number one, the bias in data as well as model building. So it is very important to detect it, report it, and to take adequate corrective measures towards that. So one, I would say, is this. Second is also in terms of transparency or the explainability, we say, across the whole process. And so that also, there's also an evolving concept around, and that's a concept right now. I'm not saying it is implemented, like algorithmic auditing also is what are the steps that has been followed. Are we not discriminate? We are making sure we are not discriminating anyone from a data perspective. The right processes has been followed from a data model building perspective. And the third thing I will say in terms of like one of the best practices is creation of a governance committee also, that ensures that from time to time there are there's a proper checklist for the model building exercise or the complete AI life cycle, that okay, what all needs to be seen from a responsibility perspective. Or there's a committee like who and accountability is ascertained, like okay, to whom the accountability falls in if there was some issue, because ultimately AI is a system. So all of these, so some of these are best practices, and then encryption of data, accesses, role-based accesses, authentication. I think all of those that has been there from long times, they continue to be there. But some of the earlier ones are some of the things which have been put as responsible AI frameworks that I am seeing across.
Right. Right. Ullas, I was going through Accenture's and I saw that Accenture is actually, betting big on synthetic data. Now, I know that, sometimes, we have to, keep on supplying data, but at times it becomes difficult to generate more and more data. And then the customer organizations are circumspect when it comes to sharing data, even with a, trusted service provider, even if they are global in nature. So how do you think this concept of synthetic data can go ahead and go forward to help train ML algorithms for the future? And probably this is a win-win, because from a customer point of view, I mean, you probably be able to explain that the identification will be masked, and how does it work? I mean, what is the future of synthetic data when it comes to training ML algorithms?
Yeah, very good point. I think, Bandev. I am myself a big proponent of synthetic data, and I've been pushing my teams for it. And the way I have arrived at synthetic data and the value of generating that has nothing to do with the privacy aspect of it. Right? Clients, when they are engaging with us, they understand that the AI models need the data, so they are happy to share the data within the confines of whatever the law provides. So, for instance, if your data cannot move out of European Union, then we ensure that the data doesn't move out. We host the data in European Union. We put the right safeguards in place. We make sure that people who are going to see the data are also seated inside European Union, right? As an MNC spread across 180 plus countries, we can do that, right? So that is usually not the reason to do this. The reason to actually build synthetic data, and when we say synthetic data, it is not actually mimicking the original data, right? What it is mimicking is the labeled data, right? So it's not mimicking the old original. Let's say if I have a simple example, I want to group some emails into different categories of emails, right? So help desk emails, request for service emails, etc. Right? So typically, what happens today is you want to build a classifier like that. So one, I need all the emails. Let's say I need emails from last 6 months. Then I need somebody from the client organization to go through those emails one by one and say, oh, this email is actually a request for service. This email is actually for some follow-up. This email is junk, right? Things like that. So somebody now has to spend the time to look at this and label them. And only once they are labeled can the machine be trained. So a lot of time goes in this human aspect, right? Which is where the synthetic data comes in. What we are now saying is that instead of somebody trying to spend 12 weeks doing the labeling, the person can spend 2 weeks making sure that largely all the different groups, some samples have been labeled. Now that sample you throw to a learning machine, a synthetic developer, it is a GAN, like a generative model, which is a specialized neural network, which will look at this and say, okay, this is typically how you are building these samples, right? So now I will say all of these emails in this bucket belong to a request for a new service. It'll take a look at that and will create more samples which look like the same that I have seen, right? Now I know all these look like a request for a service, right? So what I'm actually trying to avoid is the human input from the subject matter expert, because the subject matter expert is usually doing something else. They are not supposed to come and do the labeling. They have their regular day jobs. On top of that, they have to come and help build the smarts into the machine. That's where typically AI today becomes very slow, right? The whole model building exercise, when you get into more complex use cases, where an average technology person cannot do the labeling, like my team cannot do it because we don't understand reconciliation in finance, right? We are obviously, it's a very nuanced space. Then you need somebody who does reconciliation on day-to-day basis to come and say what is matching here, right? Or what are the classes to combine? Or if I'm doing an engineering drawing, there are 5 types of engineering drawings. Something my team cannot understand. So somebody who is an engineering expert from the logistics organization is to come and say here are 5 engineering drawings, right? That's not their day job. So they are obviously not going to spend all the time doing that. They might do it on a Friday when they're free. So now my entire model building is dependent on this data, which is labeled, curated, coming to me. And I am dependent on this individual or the SME to come and give it to me. That delays the process. That delays the go live significantly. It delays the model accuracy because the more data, as we discussed, the more data you have, and it is not about data. It is curated, tagged, labeled data, right? So just raw data is not good because the machine cannot understand it, right? So that's where the synthetic data, almost the whole regime of synthetic data has come in. And everybody realizes, anybody who is in the business as a technologist realizes that there is value into it. But we need still to bootstrap this thing, right? If I don't have a base which is high quality, whatever I create is going to still look like the base. If it is poor quality labeled data, I build synthetic data on top, it will still reflect the same poor quality, right? So you still have that, but it has nothing to do with availability of data or the fact that somebody is being protectionist. It is just about, can we reduce the human element in the model training aspect of it, right? And that's a significant drawback today, right? And and that's also from a startup perspective. If somebody is new in the business, I think a lot of their time goes in getting this curated data. It's not just the raw data. You need to get those experts to come in and curate. And which is why we have a lot of data labeling institutions and organizations doing it. But again, the challenge becomes, when you get into nuanced spaces like logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, right? You need the experts to come in and do. You cannot do crowdsourcing there. And obviously you can do crowdsourcing, but then the quality of your labeling will be very poor, right? So that's where the synthetic data is coming from, not so much from the compliance and the laws aspect of it, right? But it's a very important, I would say, moment in the AI evolution. We had so far not spoken about it. You would have people would have, you would see that, oh, I have so much of data. I have trained on this much volumes of data. I have this much data with me. So the conversation is always that. Now it is starting to shift with how much quality synthetic data can I generate, right? It's shifting there. So what it also means is I don't really need to be Facebook of the world anymore to actually do social media. I can start with 100,000 samples and create 1 billion samples from it. So soon it'll become more of an equal playing space, because I can use a synthetic data generator to create all these relationships. I can create some mock posts, right? It will lead to a lot more equal level playing field. The control on data that some people have will go away. That's my take on it.
Interesting take. Yeah. Thanks, Ullas, for that. I think we are almost at the top of the hour. Before we close, Ullas, Swati, and Niju, and you'd like to hear your final thoughts on AI in India. I mean, I would like to actually talk about a few technological developments. For example, Swati and Ullas, you come from the tech side, you'll be able to understand that one thing is this integration of DevOps or concepts of DevOps in machine learning, and we have started calling it AI ops or data ops or MLOps for that matter. And it's all about model training, data pipeline, and model hypercare, model management, for example, all these concepts. And the other broader implication that we see is the emergence of low-code application platforms, LCAP or LCNC, whichever way you. So to what extent are these new areas going to alter the AI technology space? Because at the beginning of the conversation, Ullas made a distinction between AI in the tech and the service part of it. So do you think going forward, are there any more tech concepts which are coming up according to you, apart from these? Like intelligent automation probably could be another, like intelligent BPMS suites. Like it started with rule-based automation, Pega systems, and all those in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and now we have all these organizations which have integrated RPA with AI, data analytics, AI, and So what does the future look like?
I'll go first. I'm unmuted, so I will just.
Sure.
The way I see, let's say, MLOps or let's say AI ops and some of these new paradigms coming in, I would say, and low code, no code for that matter, right? They are, I would say, development paradigms, right? So MLOps is essentially a best practice on how do you actually do end-to-end software development, right? That has nothing to do with the core concepts of AI, right? Whether I am using simple classification or I'm using deep learning, I'm using computer vision, MLOps still is applicable, right? It just means that I have followed a proper process in building my models, in training them, testing them, and then deploying and maintaining them, right? So that's what MLOps is, right? It gives me a platform, so it's a cloud-based platform. So it means that it brings in the ability to have distributed teams, right? People who are not sitting together. And of course, the beauty of having a distributed team is now I can go to where the talent is instead of asking the talent to come to me. So I can have a great UI guy sitting in Mumbai. My development AI developer is sitting in Bangalore. My data engineer is sitting in Jaipur, and they can still work together on this platform, right? And still be able to give me the model that I want to build, right? So that's why MLOps on the cloud brings that sort of, I would say, discipline in service delivery, right? So it's discipline in model delivery, right? Now, low code, no code, on the other hand, is essentially saying that you don't need to do the depths of the application. You don't have to go and write source code, right? You can be a high-level business user, and you can still benefit from doing some drag and drop and creating some widgets for yourself and getting a service, right? Now that's not a new paradigm, so to speak, right? If you recall, and if you're as old as I am, we had something called Visual Basic and Visual C long ago when C and Basic were the ways of doing things, right? And then you had Eclipse, which came in and gave you an IDE platform instead of you having to write Java. So there were always some sort of a low-code, no-code space. This terminology of low-code, no-code is a new marketing in my view, but it has been always been there. It's more of, instead of procedural programming, you're just declaring or doing a visual programming, so to speak. You have a lot of widgets. You can just drag and drop, create a flow, and then configure them, right? Not a new technology, so to speak. I think over the last few years, because of the movement to a lot of mobile applications as well as to AI, people had gone to core programming, which is you do a React or a JS, JavaScript coding. Then you used to do a lot of Python-based coding. So a lot of developers were doing hands-on coding. Obviously, they had some IDEs like Jupyter Notebooks, etc., but they would not be complete drag and drop, right? Which is where these low-code, no-code platforms come. But they are still not be able to deliver you an AI application, right? They would largely deliver an RPA at the best. An automation, a lot of the cases, it is analytics, which is, I think, a right place. You can have an analytics widget, you can configure it and deliver it. But I don't see AI going into low code, no code so easily, right? It's still the core model building is a very involved exercise. The parameter tuning is a very involved exercise. You can build some widget on top, but still the person who is doing it needs to know what he or she is doing it. You cannot just randomly move some stuff to get it out, right? And explainability goes out of the window. So it's, to me, they are just making it easier for somebody to come in and start doing it. They are, I would say, good developments in a sense. I think it just brings disciplined software engineering versus somebody writing some code somewhere and not documenting it. I think in that sense, I am happy, and I push my teams to use MLOps platforms on maybe on the cloud. Brings the ability to an accountability in how things are done. But I think it's a positive outcome. Overall, I think these platforms allow accessibility to some of the newest of technologies, right? And I would say from a teaching curriculum perspective, some of these should become part of our curriculum in the campuses, right? For let's say final year students, they should have that experience before they come out into the industry. They are well versed with some of these. It would be great, because I think that's still in the final challenges that people still tend to play around with toy data sets. They will build a toy model and then they assume that that's how everything happens, right? Whereas the real world is very, very different, right? Real world, you have lots of challenges in actually building AI. So if some of these tools, instead of coming into the industry, is also made available to the academia, right? So the campuses, like how when we were in campus, you had easy access to all these Visual Basic tools because of Microsoft support. A lot of campuses had that. So I think if the low-code campus, the MLOps, they are also made available to the students of today, I think industry as a whole will benefit quite a bit when they come into the workforce. So overall, I'm positive about all these changes which are happening.
Sure, thanks, Ullas. Swati, your take on the last pointer.
Sure. I would just say that already Ullas has said a lot, so I would just point out on 2-3 things that I am a little more passionate about here. One is when we say ML as a service, and companies, I'm seeing that they are building enterprise ML platforms, which has like preloaded algorithms, and then different functions in the organizations can use them for like data pulls and model building and all. So that ensures democratization of AI in the organization, even with less technically savvy users. So if they don't know about a particular technique and all, still they can run the models. So that is one thing. A second thing is what Ullas had also mentioned earlier, power in the hands of business users. So giving writing in natural language what you want, and then at the back end it gets converted into SQL queries and throws tables and outputs. So that is like creation of citizen data scientists within the organization. So these are a couple of, and then today, as we are seeing that in the country, there's so much talk about AI, and everybody wants to be in the field of AI, and people are so much asking that how can I get into this field. So some of these things will also ensure also penetration of AI in other parts of the organization, and also upskilling of people in other part of the organization, which will also solve for employee aspirations as well as organization problem of skills. So that is one thing that I wanted to say. I believe should be rampant in India, which is democratization, creation of citizen data scientists, and upskilling in this field with a focus by government, academia, private organizations, as well as employees. Yeah.
Thanks, Swati. Niju, I would give you the final comments to close today's discussion, which I think has been very insightful, and yeah, I mean, it's one of the best that I've had. So the closing comments from you, Niju.
Privilege of having the closing comments. So the final thing I would like to say is that I will again go back to the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that there are two things that is going to drive consumption, or at least the key drivers as we see as having potential. One is that if we take all the flagship programs of the government of India, I mean, not taking the state governments, that's going to be an added bonus. Take any of those large programs, if they were to be they were to have an element of AI as a service, I think that's going to do wonders to how these programs are being run, because each of these programs have a certain time and a certain expiry date. So if we can get more out of it through the implementation of AI, that's going to be a big thing. Second is that, as Swati put out, that every organization worth its salt today is talking about digital transformation, and I think the top of the mind is AI. So if this is something that can be implemented, of course, it's going to create more value. I mean, I would say that it's going to take care of many of those challenges which the organizations have, and thereby, accelerate the pace of economic development. So that's what I think. So overall, what we would say is that there's going to be a very bright future as far as the AI as a service is concerned, and everyone is going to partake in that.
Thanks, Niju. I think we're at the top of the hour, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Niju from Avanteum Partners, Dr. Swati Jain from EXL, and Dr. Ullas Nambiar from Accenture to participate and to have given their time to us, and thankful from NASSCOM's perspective that we had a wonderful discussion. And I'm also happy that I could probably ask the right questions, and we got the right answers for our audience. So obviously, we are going to post this across our social media channels, and I'm sure we are going to go ahead with disseminating the information and the important excerpts from this talk through you saw Naman coming in, so yeah, so he'll probably take care of this going forward. So once again, I thank you all of you for your valuable time. And thanks for all the inputs that you've given. Thanks, Niju. Thanks, Swati. Thanks, Ullas.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Bandev, for moderating.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ullas. Thanks, Swati.
Have a great evening.
Thank
you so
you.
much.